Hello, everyone, and welcome to a real estate market analysis for Gilroy, California for September of 2023. We've got some interesting numbers to cover for this month. So let's go ahead and just jump right in and get right into what the numbers are for Gilroy. Now, we're going to start off with total number of active listings. This is for September of 2023. And think of this basically as the total inventory, right? This is for you buyers out there. This is the total number of homes you had to choose from in the month of September of 2023. For those of you trying to get your homes sold, this is the amount of competition you had. How many other homes were out there trying to get the eyeballs of buyers while you were trying to do the same thing? So if we take a look at the numbers here, we can see that, and just to lay it out for folks who are new to the way I present this data, if you look at the chart, you can see we're killing two birds with one stone. We're taking a look at what things were a year ago versus the same time this year, but we're also looking back over our shoulder. And the way we do that is over to the right of this on this data. You can see September is listed twice, September of 2023 and September of 2022. And September of 2022 for last year is in red. I do that so you can graphically, visually see the difference of year to year. But then everything to the left of September of 2023 on this chart is just each month so that you can see what the trends are, where things have been going. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So last year in September of 2022, we saw that the inventory numbers were at 100. So we had 100 homes total on the market available for sale in September of 2023 in the month of September for Gilroy. This year it's at 66. So that represents a 34% drop and gives us a months of inventory number of 2.4. And just to sort of lay out what months of inventory means, if we were to freeze the total inventory right now and freeze the total number of homes sold in that month at the same number, how long would it take to burn down that inventory to zero? And we're at 2.4 months. A balanced market is considered between 4.5 to 6 months worth of inventory, depending on who you talk to. Nationally, usually folks are thinking right around the 5-month point. Here in the local Bay Area, I think 4.5 to 5.5 is probably the right place to be looking for a balanced market. We haven't been there in a long time. Just because we haven't. The market's been absolutely nuts despite interest rates sort of kicking everyone around in terms of how much they're having to pay to borrow that money to buy that house. Now, if we take a look at what's happened in the past, if we look all the way back to June of 2022, all the way up to today, we can see that we had some pretty major peaks in July, August, September of 2022. But then look at what happened in 2023. We did not see those dramatic peaks that we saw last year. Inventory remained relatively flat. I mean, if we want to call it a peak, I guess we peaked in April and May where we had 62 homes on the market. But what's really funny is look at where we are now. We've got more now than we did in the summer months. And that's an interesting number to look at. Last year was also very weird because remember, at this time last year, we were just hitting the highest interest rates, right? We were up past 7%. We were creeping up on 8%. So it makes sense to see an awful lot of accumulation of inventory in those months. What's interesting this year is that normally we would see a decline in at least start in September. And then as we head into October, November, and December, we usually see a continuing decline as we run into those winter months where folks just don't want to sell their house. They don't want to sell it in the rain. They don't want to have to deal with folks looking at their homes during the holidays. But of course, that all comes down to I have the discretion to do that, right? If I'm a seller who doesn't have to sell and I'm just sort of doing it because it seems like a good time to do it but it's a matter of convenience for you, you may choose to take your home off the market. So it'll be interesting to see what we get in the coming months in Gilroy relating to inventory numbers. Now, can we take any predictions out of this? Again, I'm a little hesitant to pull predictions today based on last year simply because the interest rate situation was a big shocker this time last year. But if we sort of look at it just from what are the trends, if we look at September of last year's was a peak, and this year's is a peak. So that's not terrible. We had a lot of fluctuation between July and September of last year. But what would I expect? If we just look at the straight up trend from last year, we would expect a decline in inventory compared to last year. And given how low we are on inventory already, that would be an interesting number to see. Because we're not seeing a big drop in demand in terms of number of buyers that are out there for Gilroy. So we'll see how that plays out over the coming months. All right, now if we take a look at the new listings, these are folks who decided to put their homes on the market in September of 2023 in Gilroy. We can see that we had 52 last year, 45 this year. That's a 15% decrease from last year. And what do we see in terms of trends? We see that we peaked in June, which is not horribly unusual. Statistically, what we tend to see is in the first few months of the year, at least in the last few years, we've started to see that big increase in numbers of new listings as folks want to get on the market before the summer market hits. It's a little unusual to see these things happening late in the year. If we look at last year, we can see that the big months were June and July. July was the big year, or the big month. This year, it was June, was obviously our peak month in terms of the number of homes going on the market. So this year, in Gilroy, more of a ramping up from March. Prior to this, in 2021 and 2020, we started to see listings come on the market a little bit earlier in the year. But new homes listed in June, odds are with the hope of getting sold before the summer season was over. Is what folks were obviously shooting for. From here, where would we expect? Well, if we look at September of last year, we can see things remained relatively flat from August, September, and October, and then took a big nosedive in November. That reflects that number we were talking about a minute ago, where folks just don't want to put their homes on the market in the middle of the winter. They don't want to deal with buyers during the holidays, so they will not list their home, and in some cases, they'll take the homes off the market and then come back on the market in January or February. But we should expect to see perhaps flat numbers in October, maybe a little bit down in October, most likely very close to the same as we saw last year, but then a pretty good drop from November to December, unless market influences are nudging folks to sell now because they anticipate a drop in the market coming in 2024. That might bring more folks onto the market. Or if people are feeling financial stress and they're willing to put up with the inconveniences of having folks viewing their home during the holiday season, they may come on the market in November, December. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at the total number of homes sold. This is straight up just the number of homes sold in the month of September of 2023, and that was 28 homes sold. Last year, that number was 43. That's a 17% drop from the same time last year. And this has got quite a bit of fluctuation in it, and given the sample size of Gilroy, we have dozens of homes that sell. See, as you can see, our highest number here is 49. It tends to be a bit of a variable number here. But if we just look at trends, we can see that. And remember, homes sold doesn't mean that's when they went into contract. That means when escrow actually closed. So keep in mind that escrow typically takes 30 to 45 days. So a home that sold in June didn't really sell in June. The offer that got that home sold probably came in March, late March or April, and then closed in June, right? Just to sort of calibrate yourself to the activity that generated the sale came 30 to 45 days earlier. So just to put that into context for you. So those really big June 2023 numbers, for instance, would indicate big offer numbers in the 2 months previous to that. And we'll see that. We're going to do a sales pending number here in a minute so we can use that to sort of anticipate what we're going to see in the next couple of months. Now, in terms of trends of where we're likely to go from here, if we look at September of last year, we saw a drop-off in October and November and then into December. I would expect to see the same level of drop-off that we saw as a general trend. And not only did this trend apply last year, but in previous years to that, 2021, 2022, it is typical to see the total number of homes sold drop as we head into the winter months. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's what we see this year. Average original list price. Now, this is one that's a little different. Folks out there in the world of real estate who do market reports like I do don't tend to report this number. I like to report it because it tells you more than what you would initially assume, I guess is the way to put it. This is looking directly into the psychology of sellers because this is not what the home was listed for at the time it sold. This is what the seller originally agreed to list their home for. So when that real estate agent entered that listing into the MLS on that very first day, this is the number they entered. So it's a calibration to the psychology. Where were sellers' minds at? What were they expecting that they should get? So in September of 2022 in Gilroy, this number was $1,277,723. This year, expectations for sellers dropped to $1,132,184 for an 11.4% drop from the same time last year. So that is actually good news because it shows that sellers were well calibrated to what was happening in the marketplace, whereas in other communities we've seen that wasn't the case. where sellers were very much expecting much higher numbers for their homes, and the market just weren't able to support that. So that ended up with homes staying on the market longer and with price reductions in future months and those types of things. So relatively flat. We peaked back in February of 2023. We saw drops in November and December, and again, those are typical for the winter months when you start to see those numbers go down for a couple of reasons. One, this in terms of expectations, the folks who are going onto the market there tend to have expectations of wanting to get their home sold soon, and they want to do it quickly. And those, for some reason, tend to cluster at lower price points versus the higher price points throughout the year. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we saw in terms of average sales prices. Now, this is what the home actually sold for. Why this one is interesting is there's another number we can derive from this, and we will here in a second. We see that not much of a change, 1.2% higher than the same time last year. $1,224,504 in September of 2022, $1,238,774 in September of 2023. So homes are actually selling a little bit higher than they were a year ago. Again, we've seen relatively flat performance since February, with the typical declines in December and January. But overall, when you sort of aggregate it out in your mind, you can see that on average we're higher than we were in 2022. Now, if we compare this to expectations, right? Let's see here. So if we go with homes sold and we take a look at, well, hold on a second here. So here we go. All right. So this is where I wanted to get you. So with those numbers, let's in our heads figure out how much of a delta do we see between expectations on the part of sellers and what homes actually sold for. So if we look at the difference between average original list price and what homes actually sold for, we see that in Gilroy, homes tended to beat expectations, right? It's up 1.2%. From the same time last year, but when compared to what expectations were, remember, expectations on the part of sellers on average were $1,132,184. This month in September, they sold for $1,238,000. So what you basically saw was sellers on average getting $106,000 above their asking price, or what their expectation was for asking price. So very interesting to note that, right? Gilroy's been interesting because it's tended to have this as a thing that's been unique to it. Other areas have sort of kind of caught up with it. Santa Clara County overall actually saw sellers getting less than expectations, not by much, only by $335. San Jose saw folks getting more than expectations, to the tune of $83,000. But Morgan Hill saw folks getting less than expected, to the tune of $143,000. So Gilroy is one of the unique communities that is seeing this big delta between what sellers' expectations are in a month versus what sellers are actually getting. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at what is percent of list price. And percent of list price tells us how much above or below asking price a home is selling. At 100%, you're getting your asking price. At 99%, you're getting 1% below, right? But let's also clarify this a little bit. This is based on what the list price was at the time the home sold. So this isn't based on original list price. This is a way to look at the psychology behind buyers, right? So before we were trying to check out where sellers' heads were at, this is what buyers were making offers at the time they bought the home. So when they looked at the home, they saw this is what the list price was after whatever changes had been made in that list price, whether those prices have been raised or lowered or whatever. And then this is how much they made offers related to that list price at the time. So we can see that the average list price, percent of list price, is actually up from last year. Last year it was 98.5%. This year it's 99%, for a 0.5% overall delta between those two numbers. So on average, sellers are getting 1% below their asking price in Gilroy in September of 2023. Now we can see that we really peaked in May, June, July, ranging from 102.4 down to, in that summer season, 101.4 if you include August in that roll call of summer months, and then dropped down to 99% in September of 2023. Explanation for that is as we start to head into the end of the season and there's fewer buyers, there's a little bit more ability in terms of buyers to have some strength in their buying practices, so they can be more aggressive and potentially come in and buy up those properties at below asking price. Next, let's go ahead and take a look at days on market. This is how long it took to get properties sold. We can see that we had 30 days in September of 2023 and 30 days in September of 2022, so the same numbers. But it's also clear, look at the trend. So, and this is an interesting one to note, and you see that big jump in February of 2023. Why? Because you had accumulated tons of properties. Homes were continuing to list all through the end of 2022, and then buyers finally came out and folks started to buy, and you ended up buying off properties that have been sitting on the market for a long time. And it's interesting to note that because that's really when things start to happen now. The buyers used to come out later in the year, say April and May, but January and February are now becoming big months. And remember, again, days on market is just like the home sold number, right? This is based on what the offer price was or what the escrow time was. So it's a little bit of a lagging number. But at 62, that tells us that we sold off an awful lot of inventory in Gilroy in February of 2023. And then things steadily declined as activity increased. And then they started their steady increase, and we should expect to see days on market increase as homes just stay on the market longer as buyers move back from the marketplace. Let's see. Next, price reductions. Now, these are homes. This is a number that runs down how many homes in the month had a price reduction. We can see we had 29%, almost 30% of the homes in Gilroy had a price reduction in September of 2023. Last month, that number was 16%, so it's a pretty big jump. And this is just properties, and it makes sense to happen at this time of year as we reach the end of sort of the selling season. We see that homes that have been on the market throughout the selling season sort of realize we need to do something to get something done before the full end of the season. So that we end up with an uptick in price reductions. In terms of the year-over-year change, this is actually down from last year. We, in some cases during the worst times of last year, we had 40, 45, almost 50% of homes were doing price reductions on a variety of different markets, but this is down 21% from the same time last year. So Gilroy isn't nearly in the place it was a year ago in terms of worrying about getting prices set correctly. So things are actually pretty good. And this number, in terms of comparing it to other communities, the kind of standout city really is San Jose, where only 5% of homes that were listed had a price reduction. Morgan Hill was really on par with Gilroy at 23%, but Santa Clara County overall had 21% of its inventory experience price reductions. All right, so I hope that that's been valuable. Now, if I can help you with any of your real estate goals, feel free to reach out. I know I didn't mention it at the head of the show, but I mean, you're watching my video, so you probably know my name's Robert Whitelaw. I'm a local real estate broker right here in Santa Clara County. I've been serving the Bay Area for over 30 years. So if you have any buying, selling, or investing goals you want to reach, I'd be happy to help you. Feel free to look me up at soldbyrobert.com for all the details. And make sure to join me for my monthly Coffee and Real Estate live chat. It's an opportunity to cover the numbers where we compare the county to the smaller communities and get sort of a 10,000-foot view. But it's also a place for you to bring your questions live, and we can discuss them and chat about them. We'll also cover some of the biggest real estate news items for the month. So feel free to check that out. It's the third Saturday of every month, and you can find a link to that at soldbyrobert.com. All right, folks, the goal is always to leave you with more information on the table, and I take up in your time. I hope we've achieved that today. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you all next time.